Hello, everyone. Welcome to this installment of Data Simplified. I am Dr. Mechi Kengla, and I'm the founder and chief data strategist of Data Products. Today, we have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Calvin Nobles about human factors engineering. Dr. Nobles was recently appointed the department chair and associate professor of information technology and management at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Previously, he worked as vice president supporting information and security at Wells Fargo. Dr. Nobles is a cybersecurity professional and human factors practitioner with over 20 years of experience. He is actively involved in the cybersecurity community, volunteering with multiple professional associations, conducting research, and speaking at venues around the country. Dr. Nobles is a cybersecurity fellow at Harvard University, Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. In 2020, he completed a cybersecurity policy fellowship at New America think tank in Washington, D.C. Thank you so very much, Calvin, for visiting with us today. We're really, really lucky to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I just look forward to this opportunity to talk about something that's so passionate to me. And as we continue to live in a really digitalized world, and we get in more in depth in that digitalization, the human factor and the human element plays more of a central role now than ever before.
Right. You are really recognized, you're a recognized practitioner in human factor engineering, and you just stated it's something that's really dear to your heart. For those in the audience that are unfamiliar with this, what is a simple example of human factors engineering?
Okay, first, let me provide a simple definition of what is human factors. So human factors is a scientific approach to redesigning systems, processes, and technologies in which people deal with on a daily basis to improve human performance and human behavior. And so that's the scientific definition. So a human factors engineer is a person that have at least achieved a master's degree or higher, or some other form of specialized certification in human factors to understand how to advance the human element in their particular environment. So human factors has been around for over 80 years, and it was born out of US military aviation, because initially when we started flying planes, we were crashing planes at a rate that was unsustainable economically. And so they started looking at how can we find people who are really qualified to fly planes, and not only that, how can we reduce some of the high friction areas? So 80 years ago, they was looking at some of the same things that we're looking at today. And so what's unique about human factors, it's applicable to every domain. Mm-hmm. It's just one of those very unique disciplines. And it's a combination of psychology, engineering, business management, sociology, and you can just go on. It's just not one singular dimension or domain that's making up this field. It's what we call a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary domain.
Oh, wow. It sounds like something that we have been practicing without being aware that we're practicing, and throughout every area of our lives that really requires some sort of structural or modular processing.
Absolutely. I mean, for people that's been trained in the field as a human factors practitioner, you recognize it, you see it, of course, because this is what we do professionally. For instance, when you take a flight, you notice the coordination between the flight attendants and the pilots flying the aircraft. If you pay attention, after takeoff at 10,000 feet, you hear ding. That's letting the flight attendants know that the aircraft has passed 10,000 feet. Also, what's important at 10,000 feet, that's the pilot can exceed 250 knots. And so those things are important in the crew resource management of how the pilots and the flight attendants work as a team, as well as how they provide services to the passengers on the plane. And so I'll give you another example. When you go to the hospital and you're getting ready to have surgery, you see the doctors annotate several times what the procedure is going to be. Mm-hmm. And they annotate that for a reason. That was born out of necessity. That was born out of human error, because at one time, medical procedures were causing people unnecessary harm, and doctors removing the wrong body parts, performing the wrong surgeries, and the medical malpractice from that aspect increasing exponentially. So
Right.
what happened is they put procedures in place, they put checklists in place where they have multiple physicians actually identify what the procedure is before they actually perform the procedure on the patient. And so that's a form of human factor engineering to reduce human errors.
That sounds incredible. The number of examples that you just listed, and I'm sure there are more.
Absolutely.
You authored a LinkedIn article in June that was fascinating on the topic of more human factors in cybersecurity, the Human Factor series, where you wrote the following, and I quote, I recently conducted a study on senior managers leveraging human factors to reduce human errors in cybersecurity. The study revealed two significant findings. One, the first finding indicated that human factors as a scientific discipline remains largely misunderstood in cybersecurity. And two, the second finding indicated a critical knowledge gap regarding human factors in cybersecurity. When I read this, I'll admit that I was reminded of the old IT joke of someone diagnosing a technical issue as the problem exists between the chair and the keyboard.
Yes.
In all seriousness, though, you concluded that this indicates why human factors are underrated when assessing cybersecurity risk, even though they are leading cause of breaches. Could you say a little bit more about why human factors have been underrated or even possibly overlooked, and what solutions you might provide or might propose to solve this?
Absolutely. So what we're seeing right now, we're seeing in cybersecurity, again, another multidisciplinary domain that's growing really fast, getting a lot of attention due to a lot of the nefarious things that are happening to companies and people in terms of cyber attacks, ransomware attacks, data breaches, and other forms of cybersecurity incidents. What we realize is that most organizations do not employ a human factors engineer in their cyber operations. And that's one problem. The other problem is, like I wrote on the LinkedIn article, is that senior security and technology executives don't really understand human factors as a scientific discipline. Mm-hmm. In fact, and I remember getting in several conversations with very senior executives about this, and I always let people tell me what they know on human factors. And the reason I do that is because, to me, as a researcher, I want to understand what they know, because we have two definitions of human factors. The first definition I gave is the scientific definition. Mm-hmm. The working definition I get from a lot of the senior executives, people do bad things, people don't pay attention, the security awareness is not where it really needs to be. There remain a large vulnerability to what's going on in cybersecurity. And that's all well, right? But to me, that's not human factors. Those are human-enabled errors or human-enabled risk, because organizations are not practicing human factors in engineering. And the reason I say that, it's hard to solve these problems because, remember, there's a knowledge gap at the senior level. It's very important to capture that at the senior level, because senior executives are responsible for the resourcing of the organization, including talent management.
That's right.
And so if they don't really understand what human factors really is, then you can't expect the organization to go out and hire these individuals and integrate them into their cybersecurity operations. And so the problem with that is that you have organizations that are practicing a lot of unique things and they need to do so. I have to say that, in all fairness, they need to do so. For instance, organizations are developing a lot of more applications in-house. Mm-hmm. Organizations are working with a lot of third parties. They're building a lot of technology. They're integrating a lot of that technology in-house. However, as a human factors engineer, my response to all of that is, at what point are you getting the expertise of a human factors engineer? Because you're integrating new technology. We need to also understand that technology has technology-induced vulnerabilities.
That's right.
It's very few times when you can integrate technology that it doesn't cost you to change something somewhere else with another piece of technology, whether it's a process, whether it's a security control, whether it's a policy, or whether it's a practice. Whatever it may be, it's going to have cascading changes throughout the organization. We need to understand that a human factors engineer could help you understand that and help you catch those areas early on in the concept phase before the deployment of those systems, rather than after the deployment of those systems, which is going to cost you more. And so that's just to highlight some of the things we're dealing with. So how do you solve some of these problems? Very simple. First, it takes the senior executives owning that they don't really understand human factors. Mm-hmm. I've been traveling around this country since 2017 talking about human factors, and I will tell you there's only one chief information security officer that told me, I don't really understand human factors, and I need to get smart on it, right?
Right.
I think that a lot of our senior executives think it's a sign of weakness not to understand something, right? And that's not the case. I will be honest with you, I'm not a medical doctor. When I go to the doctor, I'm all ears. I'm listening more than after I explain my issues, I'm listening more than I'm talking, because I'm not the expert in the room that day.
That's right.
So the same thing should happen with our executives. If you don't understand something, go out and acquire the assistance or the support you need so that you can better understand it. Mm-hmm. And human factors engineers are not just going to come and knock on your door. The reason being, they are already employed in other socio-technical fields, such as aviation, mm-hmm. medicine, industry safety, nuclear energy, nuclear power. I mean, Google, Amazon, all these people recognize the value of human factors. But unfortunately, in a lot of these organizations, human factor is not transcending into cybersecurity. For instance, in medicine, they have built their own human factors research, and they're very good at it. And they've done a tremendous job in reducing medical errors on the patient care side. Mm-hmm. However, like I said, it hasn't transcended to the cybersecurity side. And the reason being is because a lot of these senior security and technology executives don't really understand it. It's time for them to open the door now, because you got a human factors engineer at the door trying to get in, and everybody else pulling us out, right? I mean, keeping the door closed. And so we can't solve this problem by not, integrating human factors engineers into your cybersecurity operations. And what's unique about that is that human factors not new. Mm-hmm. I keep telling people that it's not new. We're not accepting the fact that it's something that should be a part of what we're doing.
So let me ask you maybe a slightly controversial sort of sub question here. Mm-hmm. Now, given that this is something that's not very well employed, human factors engineering, and I take it probably the number of people that are trained as human factors engineers are not that many in the United States, because I am from academia from a past life, but I don't hear a lot of human factor programs, engineering programs as such. So would you propose that this is something that is baked into every engineering sort of field as a sort of a sub-focus? So every engineer should have at least a preliminary training on what human factor engineering is?
Selfishly, I would say yes, but realistically, I will say this, is that if you compare the United States to Canada, the UK, Australia, and a few other countries, when it comes to accepting human factors as a scientific discipline, those countries have done a tremendous job in realizing what human factors bring to the table in cybersecurity. In fact, you can go and listen to podcasts about human factors and information security, and most of the returns that you will get from searching it will be from podcast shows in the UK. Now, there are several shows that are recently appearing in the United States. I'm happy about that because it helps get the message out. But the point I'm making here is that we have programs in this country where people go and they study human factors. But again, most of the people go into the other fields like I just explained. The other problem I would tell you, and I'm saying this because I'm teaching this course now, is human computer interaction, which is HCI. Most computer scientists know about it. I'm at the point now where I hear a professor say that you need to have a computer science background to understand human-computer interaction. And this professor is extremely knowledgeable. I respect him a whole lot. But I would counter argue that is we need people who understand human-computer interaction, whether they're computer scientists or not, because you can have engineers who are not working in that capacity, but they still need to understand HCI. So HCI, human-computer interaction, is another problem that's really being localized to computer science. We working now in really digitized environments. And because of that, we're interacting with different systems, different infrastructure, different appliances. Even in our home, we have smart appliances. And so my thing is, let's stop localizing HCI to just computer scientists and let's teach it to everybody. And so making an elective course to where we're teaching people to really understand what it means to design things that people are going to be interacting with. As my good friend James Reason wrote and said in his book, Cognitive Hacking, he said that most cybersecurity incidents happen at the interface between the human and the system. Mm-hmm. And I completely agree with him, because if systems were designed differently and smarter, and you will limit what people can do, not because you want to control them, but you want to protect them, then things would be different. Mm-hmm. And so my take on it is that I think we, as those of us in the human factors domain, need to do a better job explaining what we do and how we are applicable to every domain, including, cybersecurity, data management, data privacy, whatever it may be, because at the end of the day, it's hard to remove the human from the digitalization transformation that we're going through. Absolutely. We actually design everything. So it's very difficult to remove the human element from these practices.
Well said. And you touch on the point that I find very dear and I'm passionate about when you talk about bringing a subject that's bringing the knowledge within the subject for everyone, right? So my big thing is data literacy, and I'm working on a couple of initiatives that I'll talk about later on, different sessions around that. It is very important for everyone that engages or interacts with the systems to understand the implications.
Absolutely. I would tell you now that companies collect a lot of our data, and they needlessly collect this data. A lot of data they don't need to do what they need to do. However, I understand why companies do collect a lot of data, because on the back end, there are things like thievery, there's things like, people stealing other people's identity, people trying to legally use people's credentials and credit cards. So these companies are trying to collect as much data as possible. So when it's time to authenticate or verify if a purchase in question is actually authentic or not, they will go back and they will leverage that information. Mm-hmm. The problem with it, though, they do such a poor job in protecting it. And as a consumer, we almost have no recourse in pursuing a large company and letting our data get leaked.
Oh, no, don't even get me started on that. That should be a whole different session, because I could talk on end about the angst I have against that. But moving on, in some of your other publications that I've seen online, you talk about the Swiss cheese model for security fatigue. Could you share with our audience what that is?
Yes. So James Reason, some of the researchers in this area, came up with an idea of why accidents and catastrophic events happen. He indicates that these events do not just happen out of the blue. He indicates that there are always a chain of events leading to something catastrophic. Mm-hmm. Even though at the time, these chain of events might be completely oblivious to us, they still are there and they still exist. For instance, if let's take Equifax, they were hacked because there was some patching issues. Mm-hmm. So there were some other failures that James Reason called, there was some latent failures in there, and those failures happened because people are not paying attention, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally, whether it's a mistake or error. And I don't want to get in that because that could lead to a whole nother discussion in how errors and mistakes are really classified. And James Reason is also a seminal author on a lot of that research. But he said, what happens if you look at a piece of Swiss cheese and you hold another piece of Swiss cheese up behind it and you stick, a straw through that. Then you hold up another piece of Swiss cheese and you stick a straw through it. Pretty soon what you will have is things aligning. Those are the mistakes and oversights that we overlook that allow something catastrophic to happen. So in Equifax, you got to think about the technicians that did not do the patching. You got to think about management who didn't enforce the patching by the technicians. And then you got to think about governance, which is an executive level function,
right,
that did not catch management oversight, that did not catch the technicians patching, that led to the catastrophic event of the data breach, right? And
right.
so all of these things could have prevented that data breach. But in cybersecurity, we don't think about these things in terms of the Swiss cheese model, really, which gets back to safety side. How do we keep things safe? That's what James Reason was really getting at that time when he created the Swiss cheese model. And so when we talk about the Swiss cheese model in cybersecurity, it goes over a lot of people's head because human factors is something that's underappreciated and undervalued in cybersecurity. I really, I'm working now with other people and who really have the same passion that I have about human factors, who are trying to get it on the radar, trying to get it in the tools package for organization so they can have it in their repertoire. And a lot of people look at human factors as people that get in the way. We don't necessarily get in the way. In fact, we can save you millions of dollars over the course of 5 to 10 years by catching things early.
And not to mention the hit on reputation when you prevent such a hack from taking place. That is priceless.
And what you said right there is something that we undervalue because we expect it, right? We expect for cybersecurity professionals to keep their entities safe. So every day there are hundreds, if not 10,000 of victories every day because cybersecurity professionals get up and they do their job well. Now, I'm a cybersecurity professional as well. I don't take anything away from what we do. We do a lot of things well. We work in a very demanding space, very demanding from the regulators, very demanding from the corporate suite, very demanding from senior managers, very demanding in terms of we're always shooting at a moving target. The threat environment is constantly changing, where the cyber criminal, the hacker, the malicious actor has a huge play, a huge vote into what we're doing, right? And so this leads into something what I call the degradation of human performance. So what you get people that are stressed, really stressed. I'm not talking daily stress. I'm talking about they are really stressed out where it's impacting their health. We get people that are chronically fatigued, and we get people that are burnt out. And this happens a lot, not just to cybersecurity professionals, but this happens a lot across the enterprise. But I primarily focus on the cybersecurity professional side. Why? Because I'm one, and I personally have experienced this. And so when we have degradation in human performance, again, security executives and technology executives are not trained to identify or remediate the degradation in human performance. That's why you have to partner with somebody like a human factors expert, a psychologist, or a behavior analyst, somebody to come in to help you understand where those human performance degradation issues are what they're caused and what's causing them and why and what you must do to remediate them. And it's almost like you accept these things, these three things. And there's another one I added there since COVID, distraction. So there's 4 of them.
Yeah, so you just segue into the next question. Perfect. Like for this past year, right, we've seen an unprecedented number of workers. They're working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And this includes workers from a variety of professions outside of tech who do not necessarily even have the technical training to set up secure access to their company's internal
Right.
records, right?
Mhm.
Have you had a chance to study the work from home phenomena? And if so, what trends have you seen as it pertains in particular to cybersecurity and or human factors engineering?
So in 2000, so when at the beginning of COVID, around so COVID kicked off. So around the June timeframe, um, myself and several other researchers got together, and we just wanted to know what was the impact of remote working on employees.
Mhm.
And so we came up with 5 things. I'm gonna see if I can remember them. There was 5 factors. They were psychological, they were social factors, there was organizational factors, there were personal factors, and I'm forgetting one, but there was 5 factors that our study highlighted very clearly that people who were not working remote before the COVID, who were working remote during COVID, brought up during our study. And so we're going to publish that study within the next couple of months. And then post COVID, we want to go back and we want to redo the study, but we're going to put an emphasis on cybersecurity this time. We want to know what was the COVID impact on remote workers during COVID. Because to get to the point you said, there are a lot of employees working from home who've never been formally trained on how to be a remote worker.
Mhm.
And so organizations had to do things differently. Like we had to expand our attack surface area that happens automatically when you allow employees to work from home and they're accessing your network. So with that expanded surface attack area, you have to implement industry best practices such as multi-factor authentication.
Mhm.
There's something that we should be practicing anyway called policy of least privilege, only giving people access to what they need to do their jobs.
Yep.
And I would tell you the problem though, again, we're shooting at a moving target because a lot of people went home and they realized, oh, our virtual platform is not large enough. It's not extensive enough to support having, thousands of workers at home. So in the midst of all that, a lot of companies had to switch to different virtual platforms, whether they were moving from Skype to Zoom or to Teams, whatever. And whatever platform they was moving to, it means that now the security and technology teams got to work even harder, one, to integrate it, and two, to secure it. And so not only was it stress from the other employees across the organization that I call the non-technical employees, because now they got to learn new things constantly, but now your security and technology teams are stressing out and they're challenged as well. And so what you're trying to do, again, is to limit the stress and the burnout and fatigue on them. But unfortunately, during COVID, we reached new heights. And it's to the point now where a lot of remote workers are saying, I'm not going back to work. And so what does all of this mean for a human factors perspective? Well, our job is to look to reduce high friction areas that impact human performance across the organization. So we are particularly concerned with distractions, burnout, fatigue, stress, and there's many other. For instance, in aviation, they got something they call the dirty dozen. And if you look at the dirty dozen, these are kind of like attitudes that workers take. And some of them are like lethargic, complacency, non-supportive. And it's those type of behaviors that not only resonate in aviation, they resonate in tech, they resonate in cybersecurity. And so our job is to make sure that the organizations are addressing those things. Unfortunately, cybersecurity, human factors in cybersecurity, especially from a human performance issue, we're not even on the top 3 levels, tier levels. We're way off in the back somewhere that might get mentioned every now and then. And one of the things I do, I look at articles on LinkedIn about where they talk about burnout, stress, and fatigue. And I read the comments of some of the senior executives. And it's appalling. It's appalling that everybody's trying to address these issues by putting a Band-Aid on a gashing wound. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, you know what? None of this works. Now, recently I read that one company gave their employees a week off for like a mental health break.
Yes.
absolutely lovely. That's the things that human factors engineer drives to help happen, is to call those things out and say, people are at their wits' end. So let's do something differently. For example, in aviation, when pilots start making mistakes when they're tired. So now they have days, they have a certain amount of hours that they can fly and be involved in flight operations. In cybersecurity, we need to identify those roles that when people become cognitively overwhelmed, they're no longer able to produce at a top level. And then we need to put some type of parameters around the hours those people are working to prevent mistakes from happening. But we kind of gaff it off because we're not serious about human factors in cybersecurity.
I think I have nothing to add, folks. You said it all. But to wrap this up, let's have one final question. I know we're running out of time here, right? Some of your work, I read some of your work, and in talking to you today, I thought it was interesting how a discussion about a technical problem, right? So defending a company's data against data breaches is every bit as much a question of human element as well as the problem in equal parts, right? Human and machine. Could this be an argument in favor for encouraging cybersecurity professionals, or at least senior leadership overseeing the department, to include training in human cognition and psychology as well?
Excellent question. Excellent question. And I would say yes, but let me explain why. Right now, what we're seeing more cognitive hacks than ever before. So let me explain cognitive hacks. Sometimes we refer to them as phishing attacks, spear phishing attacks, vishing attacks, or smishing attacks. And so what a cognitive hack is, and the reason I like saying cognitive hack is because I want people to start looking at it differently. So you can actually see the schematics of what's happening. What it is a cyber criminal, a hacker, or a malicious actor trying to manipulate you to do something. When I say you, mean you as the employee. You play a critical role in the execution of the cognitive hack. In other words, if you don't execute what the hacker is asking you to do, then the cognitive hack is unsuccessful. But if they're able to convince you by leveraging your biases against you, they're able to execute the hack successfully. We don't talk about it in that aspect. We kind of brush over it at a very high level. That's spear phishing. But understand that people are trying to convince you to do something to help them out. It's like knowing the bad guy is at the door and you go unlock the door and open it and say, welcome to my house and take what you want. I'm gonna just turn my back to it. And the bad thing about it is the employees are completely oblivious to this most of the time because the cognitive hacks are so sophisticated. And because of that, they're very real-like. And the question I always ask is, if somebody asks you to do something and it's not what you typically would do, even though it sounds real, like for instance, if my boss tell me, hey, Calvin, click on this link, I need to talk to you. My boss never asked me to click on a link. He will say, call me, or he will come out of my office, right?
Right.
So that within itself, asking me to click on a link is not something I would do. I would just pick up the phone and say, hey, Dean, is everything good? You asked me to call you. And because that's how we operate, that's our normal operating procedures, not for me to click on a link. And so because of that, yes, these people need to train more on this, and not just train to something that's static, but train on real world events. The things we see happening on TV, where people and the news reporters are reporting it, the things we read on social media, the things we read about, we need to incorporate those things into our security awareness. And then we need to put people through the paces, not to trick them, but to inform them. And then we need to have reinforcing of that throughout the year. A lot of times we get security awareness once a year, and then we walk away from it. That's totally ineffective, because think about how pilots are trained. They will, even though they are current in the aircraft, at a certain point, pilots have to go back to the training unit and undergo arduous training in the simulator. This is to refresh them and reinforce the training to make them better. And that is exactly what we need to do in cybersecurity. We need to reinforce them. The other thing I recommend too, we need to use virtual simulators in cybersecurity in terms of, I believe if you walk people through training and say, I want to create a weak password, you telling them to create a weak password, but then you're going to show them the implications of creating that weak password. You created a weak password. A hacker was able to guess it. A hacker was now able to leverage your credentials to get in our networks, and now they're able to exfiltrate our data. Now they got 30,000 records, and now they're going to go and sell those records on the dark web, and they're going to make money. But not only that, that's going to be a downside of that, because now people are going to start stealing our consumers' identity, and they're using their credit cards and all the other resources on the web. And so helping people understand that gives them a better understanding of why we do what we do and why we shouldn't do what we do when it comes to online positive security behavior.
Perfect. I think we'll just leave it at that. That's fantastic, folks. You have some great suggestions and things that you should start to do to up your cybersecurity, and as well as include human factor engineering as a key component of it. Well, that's all for human factors engineering today. For more data science insights and future installments of Data Science Simplified, just subscribe to our YouTube channel, Data Products. You can also follow us on Facebook at Data Products LLC, or on Twitter at Data Products. I want to thank Dr. Calvin Nobles again for joining us and sharing us some fantastic insights. You can always reach out to him or contact him at his LinkedIn or his Twitter contact handle below. Well, see you next time, and bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you.